So I don't know about you, when you first started wood turning, choosing a finish is quite daunting and overwhelming as well. So I'm only going to cover finishes that I prefer to use in these videos, as well as little tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way to hopefully help you out along your journey. So I've tried a lot of finishes and I prefer to stick to a few, and one of those being is simple old-fashioned Danish oil. And this little tip that I'm about to show you about Danish oil came from this book here, Polishers Handbook by Neil Ellis here in Australia. And it's got every finish in there that you can think of and how to apply it, and simple little tips in there to help you along your way. So I highly recommend that. I'm not sponsored by any of this. I'm just showing you little things that will help you out on your turning journey. Now, this piece here is a lovely piece of Queensland Red Stringybark. It's a hardwood here in Australia. And now I've sanded that all the way up to 240 grit with this rotary sander. And that's what it looks like there. And I finished it with 240 grit. Now, the beauty of using Danish oil on wooden bowls and things like that is it allows it to remain its natural color. It enhances the color and the natural features of the timber, but it also leaves a really hard finish on it that is watertight and very durable, but easy to fix if things happen down the line, that little scratches and dings might happen, and Danish oil can simply be reapplied later on down the track. And also, Danish oil can be found everywhere. It's an old-fashioned oil that polymerizes and goes hard. And I don't know about you, but when you've used it in the past, if you've left a little bit in the dish from the day before, you come back the next day and it's gone super hard in the dish, the same thing happens to the timber. It soaks in and goes really hard. Or your cloth, you can really stand the cloth up into the corner and it'll stand up by itself. So what I'm going to show you is wet sanding with Danish oil. So what you need is Danish oil, the main ingredient. You need a tray to put it in. I've got 320 grit here, and then after you've finished it this time, the next day I just use a little bit of steel wool or your 400 or 600 grit just to take those raised fibers off, and then apply the finish as you normally would by applying it and waiting for it just to go a little bit tacky and then buffing it in. Rags, you need 3 rags, one to apply the finish, one to buff in all the fines and the oil, and then one to remove the finished item off the lathe. So 3 of those. And a tray to put it on, because if it gets on your lathe, it goes really hard. Let's get into it. Let's apply some Danish oil to this piece of timber. It's a generous amount, I know. I'm just going to put it on my rag and then turn the lathe by hand just to get it all over the piece. And it soaks it up a lot. But you can see that red stringy bark just enhances the beauty of that timber. Where it goes a bit lighter, it keeps it nice and light. That's what I really like as well about Danish oil. So I'm just going to get a nice thick coat all over the piece. Now I'm just going to apply it to the inside of the bowl. Another cool little thing that I want to quickly mention is when I'm sanding, I always use my air compressor and I blow the grit out in between grits. I blow the piece off in between grits, and that gets out any of the previous sandpaper dust, as well as it highlights if you've missed any torn grain in the piece. Right, it's looking really nice. Now I'm back to the back of the bowl, and I've let that, you can see it's soaked in. There's areas where it's a lot lighter and there's areas where it still looks a little bit wet, and the timber is soaking that in really nicely. And that's what I really like about Danish oil as well, is that it penetrates deep into the fibers of the timber and locks it all in and goes hard. And that finish penetrating into the timber means that it's nice and durable as well. Now I'm going to lather it right up with oil, turning my variable speed lathe right down. I've got it on 0, and then I'm just going to flick it in reverse. Turn the power on first. Righto, so I'm just going to turn the speed of my lathe right down to 0 because I don't want it flicking everywhere, and then just turning on reverse. And I've folded this bit of sandpaper up. I've made one cut. I fold one piece in, I fold it in towards the center, and then back over on top of itself. So none of the sandpaper is rubbing, the abrasive part of the sandpaper is not rubbing on itself. Looks beautiful. And I really like wet sanding. I prefer to wet sand a lot of my pieces simply because it just gives it such a different effect, and I just enjoy it. It makes me feel like I'm really doing the best finish of my ability. And I simply work the grit back and forth over the bowl. Like so. Might be able to speed it up a little bit. That's why it's important to have that little tray there to get any flicks or little drips coming off. And if you can see the way I'm holding my sandpaper like this, I'm holding it so my thumb is underneath and my fingers are on top, and that way if the sandpaper wants to catch on something, it'll just give way. It won't carry me forward into the lathe. We're now starting to get some fines building up on the front of my sandpaper there. Now you want to work those fines because it's a really nice fine abrasive. It's the Danish oil mixed in with the Red Stringybark. And you want to work that across the surface. Just going to add a little bit more there. Once I've done that and I'm happy, you can see those fines there on the sandpaper across here. They've helped me polish this piece really nicely. I get my other clean rag and I put it on straight away, and I've got nice firm pressure on the piece, and I'm pressing all those fines and that oil into the piece, into the bowl. And they will go in any little spots where it might be a little bit, well, hopefully you don't have any torn grain, but it'll go into the torn grain, but it won't completely disguise torn grain if that's what you're hoping. I know how you feel. So just keep working your cloth back and forth over the piece. I'm currently running at 300 RPMs. Now I'll quickly oil up the inside of this bowl again, because that first coat in there would have just penetrated deeply into the fibres, but you'd have nothing to sort of sand up really nicely. A little bit on the rim there, and then we'll get stuck into it. Just turning the lathe back on in reverse with the low speed. It's going to start on the rim, but as I'm working the rim there, I just move the sandpaper back and forth, and then I'll go on the inside there. And I find for stability just putting my alternative hand either underneath or around my wrist like so, and that helps me stabilise my hand as it moves in around into the bowl there like that. And just working that oil and the sandpaper back and forth. You could see on the outside of the bowl there wasn't a sheen or a shine, but as it hardens overnight and those fibres that you've pushed into the grain harden, and then you put your next coat on, it'll become shinier and shinier again as you put each layer on. And I go up to three coats. This first coat is wet sanded and then buffed in. The second coat is applied with the cloth as normal and then buffed off just before it goes tacky. And then I let it sit, and then I come back the next day, so a 3-day process. And then I do it again. I use steel wool, just quickly sand the outside, the inside, apply a coat, and then buff it in. You see all those fines? That's what you're after. Now I'm going to buff this in, same thing again for safety. I just hold the cloth with my thumb underneath and my fingers over the top. Just if it wants to give, it'll just take off. It won't drag my fingers in with it. And now I'm just going to push that cloth in quite firm. It's quite hard. And I work that oil and the fibres in. I buff it all in. So that's how I wet sand with Danish oil. Don't forget, after you've finished wet sanding with your rags, make sure you dispose of them properly outside your workshop, as they can become quite flammable. The same with your steel wool, dispose of it properly outside of your workshop, because they are highly flammable. So I hope you've enjoyed this short video on wet sanding with Danish oil. As I continue to learn and pick up new things, I'm going to be sharing as much as I can to create a little database so we can all learn and grow together. Please, if you've got any comments or anything you can think of or would like to see, put them in the comments below. And if you think I've done a good job, give us a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. So I will see you and talk to you all directly. Cheers. Bye.